cage 14, the INLA cage. But little did I know what was in store for me. For when the system tried to take my political status away from me through a minor altercation inside the prison, and I was removed from cage 14 into the punishment block. So it was. This was after a period of maybe just a matter of, if it was 2 weeks in cage 14, I ended up in the punishment blocks for a period of, I think it was 28 days. And the system then decided that I wouldn't be going back to cage 14, that I would be being removed into the H blocks on remand, to spend my time in remand in the H blocks. H1 was where I was first taken to. I remember first going into H1. The funny thing about myself being in here was that I was a remand prisoner in cage 14, and where I initially should have been spent my remand in cage 14. I was removed in here removed from here, went to H blocks, and ended up, after having got sentenced in the H blocks, because the system was not permitting me my political status. Whatever was happening on the outside, the system then gave way, and I was then told by the governor, out of the blue, I was being removed back up here into the cages to serve the rest of my sentence because I was entitled to special category status. When I was brought back up here, I was brought into, the first I met was a provisional cage. It was cage 9. Really didn't know anybody in cage 9 at the time, but that was, we brought in boys from Belfast, were mostly where I was born and reared, were in cage 11. That was where Brenton Hughes, all the Falls Road men were. All the Belfast men who I had been very friendly with, even on the outside, were in cage 11. But here was I, put into cage 9. Was very well greeted when I came into cage 9 by the provisional prisoners, even though I was an INLA prisoner. At the time, sat down, they treated me well, had a shower, lovely shower, got fresh clothes. It was really, really, compared to what I was in earlier on that day, sitting in my cell in H4, my cellmate, who I had to leave behind, was very emotional, you know. Everybody knows the history of the H blocks during the Dirty protest, and here was I leaving fellas who I'd spent some period of time with on the blanket, came through the forced washing and so on. Here was I just taken out of the blue and put back into the cages as a special category prisoner. My period in cages was in cage 9. I'd been in them all. I'd been in them all bar 13. I'd been in cage 9, cage 10, because as the prisoner numbers were dwindling, the system then, and there was no more special category prisoners coming in. prisoners with special category status were being released by the numbers, and the special category status population was dwindling. So the system then decided to close certain cages down. They went from cage 9 closed, we moved into cage 10. Cage 10 closed, we moved into cage 11. 13 was closed and came down to 12, and then we ended up with one cage. So we did cage 11. I spent the rest of my time until July 1986 when I was released. So I was in cage 11. Well, the major difference, between, well, if I can just clarify the issue, the cage that whenever we did get released, whenever I went into cage 11, the difference in the cage is, it was like coming out of hell in H4 in the blanket, where you were being physically beat, you were living in a cell with your own excrement, your own urine, and so on. Coming out of a cell in such a horrendous situation that for humans to be living in, to be all of a sudden taken and removed from that and told you had special category status and removed into this, which people would call, I think the politicians were calling it, a holiday home. Maybe the politicians were in here for a while themselves and would realise it wasn't just such a holiday home. So it wasn't for what some of us actually went through. In the cages was, you really had your own freedom within the cage. You had your parcels coming in, you had your free access, so you were able to exercise whenever you wanted. You had the football pitches, which were just right outside. They were right outside all the cages. In front of all the cages, 2 football pitches. So there was one of the ones, whenever you had plenty, some of the boys in the cages had their pigeons and budgies, and they reared their own pets in the cage, so that which was funny. One of the things I used to do was get on top of the roof, on top of the watchtower, and look over the walls, and you could see the M1 motorway, the traffic flowing. Wonder where was everything. Here you were so close, but yet you were so far away from your family. Where was everybody going? What was going on? What were people doing with their lives? You could see the movement outside, over the top of the wall, from the top of the water tower. So you could, just looking around at the watchtowers now, it's brings back a lot of memories. The cages, to me, until I was eventually released in in my later years in 1986, 1985. On the day I was released, the night before, the boys started playing music. One of the ones they played was the song "Oh Belfast, You Called to Me," knowing that I was being released the next day. Strange being released the next day, simply because was that the day that when I was due for release, where I should have been released early that morning, the Screws decided they would have a protest during their working, whatever their working problems were within the prison. My release was delayed. I really didn't know whether I was getting released or not because of what the Screws at the time had actually, what they were protesting for or what it was about. Any prisoners that I remember being released from the cages, they were getting released early in the morning. Probably their families were sitting on tenterhooks waiting on them outside. But here was I, geared up to be released early in the morning, all of a sudden being told that I wasn't being released because of some prison protest from the Screws. I didn't know how long it was going to last, but I just knew my family would be outside waiting on me. Eventually, when I decided to be released, I went through the hole, went down to the man of the Screws, giving me back any belongings that I had. They gave me it in a brown envelope. I can remember the number and all that I had, so I can. I remember just walking out, getting released, and just told, there you go, there's your brown bag, anything you have, you've packed it up, you've sent any of your stuff that you were sending out pre-release, you've got the majority of it all away, and whatever few things you had left, you carried it out in one brown bag to walk out of turnstile. To walk out of turnstile and find that none of the family were there. I can remember so well walking out, being released, expecting family to be there because of the Screws protest, and not knowing when they were going to release me. My family were taken away for lunch. So I walked out, not a sinner, not one member of my family was there, but I knew, and one of the Quakers from the hut outside for the visitors, I remember one of the Quakers actually coming out and speaking with me. Other prisoners' relatives who were up to actually visit them, who you had actually met over the years through the visits and so on, were hugging and wishing you all the best, and regardless of whether they were from Armagh, Tyrone or Derry, wherever they were from, they were going to drive out their bus to take you home. So they were. But I decided, no, I said, my family, they know, whatever, there's just been I just didn't know what was going on. It was just tenterhooks at the time. remember my sister Kathleen, she was the youngest in the family, she cried her eyes out. So she did. Celine, my sister, the eldest sister, she was just so, she just broke down. It was just so hard. I don't know how they stood by me so long. What did they go through by coming up to see their brother for a period of over 8 years in Long Kesh. Haven't got 16 years for the period of time that I was in. Through lost some remission through different protests and so on, and actually got out over 8 years later. So I did, and through thick and thin, the families stood by the prisoners, and that was what they did. How they done it, I don't know. That was one of the things. My father was getting on in years. My father wasn't able to get up and see me as regular as he could. Looking at the football pitches was one of the ones where whenever I did come up and spend the rest of my later years in Long Kesh, I was very, very much into running. So didn't play football much, ran an awful lot looking at the football pitches now. We actually ran inside I can remember inside cage 10. The first time through talking with the prison physical, whatever he was, the PE instructor or something, we decided we would run a marathon. So we trained, and we actually ran a marathon on the football pitch the first time. So we did. I used to run the pitch most times with dairymen. There was myself and some of the dairymen. I really didn't knock about with Belfast men as such for the period of time when I was in the cages. Most of my friends were from Newry, Armagh. One of them, Big Martin Corey from Corey Kinnicker, just outside Lurgan, who I believe to be a gravedigger, believe it or not, who had got something like 25 years recommended. You know, it was strange situation. Belfast man spent most of his time with countrymen throughout his time, the rest of my time in the cages. So it was so much sticks out, but so much sticks out about the H blocks, more so than the cages. So much bore in my mind about the H blocks. Some of the things, the inhuman things that suffered compared to what we were able to go about our own life, our own lifestyle within the cages, more or less, except for maybe the screws deciding to come in and disturb you for a morning to search the cages, whilst we had our patching hidden the timbers. So we did. It was rare. Some of the time, some of the screws were very trivial, even in the cages when they come in to do the searches. I remember once one PO in particular, he had this thing about whenever you were getting searched and getting allowed back into your huts, he wanted everybody to remove shoes. So they couldn't remove a whole cage into the punishment blocks because there wasn't enough room to put a whole cage in the punishment box. He insisted on every prisoner taking a shoe off. But I remember the time when I did refuse to take my shoes off, and they ended up down in the H block. It was over in Easter. It was over an Easter period. It was over an Easter period, so it was. All in all, I spent my time in cage 14, the INLA cage, in 1977. Later years, I come up into cage 9. I was in 9, I was in 10, was an 11, went back to 10, and really, all in all, it was an experience. It was a major experience. But all in all, I think it made me stronger. And I have a family. My daughter's at university. She's doing modern history. She was doing modern history and politics. She's now doing modern history and criminology. Who is not shy and asked me questions about my past. And I'll be honest, she asked me why did I do it, for what I was charged with. I told her I was a political prisoner. It was a time of political unrest. And I found it was the only way that we're going to achieve anything. Being a Republican Socialist, and looking back at how things have changed now, it has changed. People, I don't find there's any more want. I think that people voted their way. There's no more want for military activity on the streets. But who knows what generations are going to throw up in later years. Myself, I wonder what 10 men died for. When I look at the present situation under the Good Friday Agreement, I wonder was it worthwhile ourselves, so many prisoners, so many volunteers, so many families, what they came through. If this was able to be achieved in later years, I mean, why did people wait from the provisional movement for this to go on 30 years later? Dead volunteers, people on the streets dead, political unrest, and the major people who were behind it are sitting now shaking hands with each other in Stormont. Such a waste. Such a waste of life.